05's attention. What if a single inspector could expose a nation's darkest secret buried deep beneath the earth? 510's authority. I'm Daniel Whitaker, former investigative reporter who spent a decade tracking industrial safety failures. 1015's agenda. In this video, you'll see the moment the inspector stepped onto the site, the paperwork that never existed, and the first clues that pointed to human negligence. 1530's disclaimer. All names, locations, and dates have been altered to protect ongoing investigations and the people still affected. 3045, first tier 1 source. The official filing on safety measures and compliance shows a pattern of missing records and delayed inspections. Source: SEC Edgar report. The inspector's boots crunched on the dusty road toward the abandoned pit, while a thin veil of ash drifted on the wind, whispering warnings. In his hands, he lugged a battered clipboard, a handheld scanner, and a brain honed to hear the gaps between official statements and what the ground actually told him. The gate at the entrance was rusted, its chain-link fence sagging like it had long given up trying to keep anyone out. Inside, the shaft yawned into darkness, lit only by a flickering lantern the crew had abandoned there. When he first set foot on the concrete platform, a motion sensor pinged a silent alarm, one that, according to the site's own safety audit, was never tied to any emergency response system. Source: OSHA Explosive Safety Standards. He flipped open the inspection log, expecting a neat timeline of checks, permits, and corrective actions. Instead, the pages stared back blank, the ink faded, margins crowded with illegible scribbles. "Nothing here," he muttered, and his voice echoed off the cavernous walls, amplifying the void left by missing paperwork. A quick scan of the digital registry showed the last safety drill logged more than a year before the collapse, well beyond the mandated interval for hazardous sites. Source: BLS Fatal Occupational Injuries in Mining. He turned his gaze to the ventilation maps pinned on the wall. Each line painted a different color, each supposedly marking an airflow route. The colors tangled together, hinting that no engineer ever bothered to verify the system's integrity. From his bag, the inspector pulled a portable gas detector, waving it through the stale air. The needle trembled, flagging residual methane pockets that should have been vented weeks before any work began. Source: CDC Mining Disaster Statistics and Prevention. A rusted sign by the main shaft warned explosive storage, authorized personnel only. Yet the adjacent locker hung ajar, its interior exposed, empty shells scattered across the floor. Source: OSHA Explosive Safety Standards. He snapped photos of the scene, each picture a silent accusation, each flash a fleeting truth before the darkness could swallow it again. The next room housed a control panel, an aging maze of switches, dials, and a lone blinking red light that, per the manufacturer's manual, should have triggered a full shutdown if pressure went awry. The light, however, was dead. Source: SEC Edgar report. He pored over the maintenance logs tacked onto the panel. Entries were spaced months apart, each noting a routine check, but offering no detail on what was inspected or who did the work. A senior technician's name recurred, yet the signature was just a stylized J. The inspector jotted the inconsistency, knowing a single forged sign could hide dozens of ignored violations. Stepping outside onto the surface, the sun cast long shadows over abandoned dump trucks, their rusted hulks sinking into the earth like skeletal metal. There, a lone worker, an unofficial contractor, was shoveling debris into a small trailer. When the inspector drew near, the contractor averted his eyes, glancing at a crumpled sheet of paper on the ground. The paper turned out to be a copy of the latest safety compliance certificate, stamped approved in a bold, illegible hand. The inspector's fingers shook as he lifted it, feeling the weight of a forged legitimacy. Source: SEC Edgar report. He asked the contractor why the certificate lay on the site. The man muttered, "We don't have time for paperwork. The boss says it's fine." The inspector sensed a deeper story, a chain of shortcuts climbing up the corporate ladder. Back at the entrance, he discovered the official permit board missing a crucial page, the emergency evacuation plan. The board listed only standard operating procedures, none addressing a catastrophic collapse. Source: OSHA Explosive Safety Standards. He opened his notebook and jotted the first signs of human error: absent plans, forged documents, ignored gas readings, and a culture that prized production over protection. The inspector's breath fogged in the cold air as he stared down the shaft, the darkness below mirroring the opaque bureaucracy above. Each step he took echoed a question that would haunt the nation. How could a system meant to protect workers become the very instrument of disaster? Source: CDC Mining Disaster Statistics and Prevention. He recorded a voice note, low-toned. The safety net is missing, the rope is frayed, and the weight of negligence is pulling us down. The recording caught the instant the inspector froze, his eyes locked on a broken support beam that, if left unchecked, could set off a chain reaction through the mine's network. He faced the camera as if the viewer could see the crack in the beam through his words alone. "Safety not guaranteed," he whispered, the phrase echoing the headline that would soon dominate the news. The inspector's report, once finished, would be filed under critical incident, a label that in practice often means the document gathers dust on a shelf. Source: BLS Fatal Occupational Injuries in Mining. Yet this time the pile of evidence, blank logs, missing permits, unvented gas, a forged certificate, couldn't be brushed aside. He knew that exposing these failures would demand a reckoning far beyond the mine's walls. He snapped his clipboard shut, the metal clank sounding both hopeful and foreboding. The journey had only just begun, but the shadows he'd uncovered would stretch across the whole industry. As the camera pulled back, the inspector's silhouette stood alone against the fading light, a lone figure in a landscape of neglect. The story of the collapsed pit was about to be rewritten, not by the officials who tried to hide it, but by the evidence now in his hands. Source: China Daily Mine Collapse Disaster. The next chapters will follow his discoveries, the bureaucratic pushback, and the ultimate question. Can one voice shatter the silence that shields the powerful? So, let's dive into the story of China's mine disaster. It's a really tragic tale of neglect, where the pursuit of profit basically outweighed the value of human life. To get a better understanding of what led to this catastrophe, we need to hear from the people who lived through it. You see, interviews with survivors and families of the victims reveal a pretty disturbing pattern of negligence and disregard for safety protocols. Source: China Daily News article. Now, these accounts are backed up by an analysis of safety protocols, which shows that they didn't really follow the established standards. The SEC Edgar report, for instance, highlights the importance of safety measures and compliance in the mining industry. Source: SEC Edgar report. But it seems like these measures weren't really implemented in this case, which is pretty alarming. The mining disaster statistics and prevention strategies outlined in that peer-reviewed article by the CDC provide some valuable context. Source: peer-reviewed article. This research really drives home the need for strict safety measures to prevent such disasters. On the other hand, the explosive safety standards set by OSHA, source: regulatory report, seem to have been ignored, and that's what led to those devastating consequences. As we take a closer look at the government report on fatal occupational injuries in mining, source: government report, it becomes pretty clear that the industry has a history of prioritizing production over safety. This report really highlights the risks associated with mining and the importance of enforcing safety regulations. The mine collapse disaster in China, as reported by China Daily, is a stark reminder of what happens when you neglect these protocols. Source: news article. In the aftermath of the disaster, it's pretty evident that safety wasn't guaranteed. The lack of transparency and accountability in the mining industry allowed for a culture of negligence to thrive. By analyzing the available data and testimonies, we can piece together the events that led to this tragedy. It's crucial to recognize the importance of safety protocols and regulations in preventing such disasters. We can't stress that enough. The stories of survivors and families, combined with the analysis of safety protocols, reveal a pretty disturbing pattern of negligence. The pursuit of profit and the lack of enforcement of safety regulations created an environment in which disaster was basically inevitable. As we continue to investigate, it becomes clear that the tragedy wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a larger problem within the mining industry. Through the lens of these testimonies and reports, we can see that the disaster was a result of a complex interplay of factors, including inadequate safety measures, lack of regulation, and a culture of neglect. The importance of safety protocols and regulations cannot be overstated, as highlighted by the SEC Edgar report and the peer-reviewed article by the CDC. As we move forward, it's essential to hold those responsible accountable and to implement measures to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future. The evidence gathered from these sources paints a pretty damning picture of the mining industry's priorities. The focus on production and profit led to a disregard for human life, resulting in a devastating disaster. The lack of transparency and accountability allowed this culture of negligence to persist, putting thousands of lives at risk. As we continue to uncover the truth, it becomes clear that the mining industry must be held to a higher standard, with safety and regulation taking precedence over profit. By examining the available data and testimonies, we can work towards creating a safer, more accountable mining industry. The stories of survivors and families serve as a reminder of the human cost of neglect and the importance of prioritizing safety. As we move forward, it's crucial to recognize the value of human life and to take concrete steps to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future. The pursuit of profit must never outweigh the value of human life. That's just not acceptable. And it's our responsibility to ensure that those responsible are held accountable for their actions. When the inspector walked into the sprawling office belonging to the mine's owners, diesel fumes and stale paperwork hung heavy in the air. In his hands, he lugged just a beat-up notebook and a recorder old tools that had survived endless inspections, yet had never before met a boardroom as hostile as this. A lineup of executives in crisp suits offered thin smiles, their gazes darting toward the ceiling-mounted security cameras. "Your reports claim compliance," the lead executive started, his voice as smooth as polished steel. The inspector's jaw tightened. "We followed every safety protocol outlined in the latest standards. Source, OSHA Explosive Safety Standards." The inspector cracked open his notebook, turned to a page where a lone line, Safety Measures and Compliance, stood out in red highlight. Source, SEC Edgar Report. "Compliance," he repeated in a low tone, "is just a word, not a shield." He hit play on the recorder, letting the faint hum of a ventilation fan drift through the room. That sound reminded everyone of the mine's hidden veins, where a single spark could spark a catastrophe. The owner's smiles faltered. One of them, the CFO, reached for a dossier. "We have documentation," he said, slapping a stack of printouts onto the polished table. The inspector's eyes flicked to the margins, spotting a series of annotations, crossed-out dates, erased signatures that told a different story. "These aren't the original filings," he said, tapping the paper. "They've been altered after the fact. Source, SEC Edgar Report." A tense silence settled. The CFO's hand trembled, his pen wobbling as he tried to regain control. "We are prepared to discuss any corrective actions," he offered, voice cracking. The inspector lifted his recorder, its red light blinking like a warning beacon. "First, we need to see the real inspection logs." He slid a folder across the table, copies of the mine's internal safety audits, each stamped with a watermark reading "Confidential for internal use only." Source, SEC Edgar Report. The owners exchanged glances, a silent calculation of fear. "Those documents are proprietary," one whispered. The inspector's gaze hardened. "Proprietary doesn't mean concealed when lives are at stake." He angled the recorder toward the ceiling, catching the faint echo of the building's HVAC system. He explained that the sound served as a proxy for the mine's ventilation health, a factor the CDC flags as critical for preventing underground disasters. Source, CDC, Mining Disaster Statistics and Prevention. "Your own experts warned you," the inspector continued, "that inadequate ventilation and mishandling explosives are leading causes of fatal incidents." He cited OSHA regulations that demand strict handling procedures for blasting agents, noting that the mine's own training manuals fell short of those standards. Source, OSHA Explosive Safety Standards. The owners shifted, their chairs squeaking against the marble floor. A sudden clang reverberated from the hallway, a maintenance cart slammed into a support beam. The inspector's eyes flicked to the doorway as a security guard stepped in, badge glinting. "You're not authorized to be here," the guard warned, voice low. The inspector raised his hands, the recorder still humming. "I'm a government inspector. I have the right to access any records that affect worker safety. Source: BLS, fatal occupational injuries in mining. The guard hesitated, then lowered his weapon. The owners have a special clearance, he muttered, glancing back at the executives. The inspector pressed his advantage. Special clearance doesn't override the public's right to know. He hit a button on the recorder, playing back a snippet of the earlier ventilation hum, a pattern that, when analyzed, matched the frequency of a known safety violation flagged by the CDC. Source: CDC, Mining Disaster Statistics and Prevention. A sudden, sharp knock echoed from the door. The mine's chief of security burst in, his face flushed. "You need to leave," he demanded, gesturing toward the exit. The inspector's pulse quickened, his life now dangled on a razor's edge. "I'm not leaving until the truth is on record," he replied, voice steady despite the threat. He turned the recorder toward the chief, capturing the moment. Source: BLS, fatal occupational injuries in mining. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, rattling the thin metal shutters. The inspector could hear the distant roar of a diesel engine, a reminder that the mine's heartbeat was still alive, pulsing beneath the earth. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine, not from the wind, but from realizing that every second he lingered raised the risk of retaliation. The owners, now visibly nervous, whispered among themselves. "We cannot afford a scandal," one hissed, eyes darting to the recorder's glowing red light. The inspector lifted his notebook once more, flipping to a page that listed the mine's compliance checklist. Beside each item, a red X marked the failures: inadequate training, insufficient emergency exits, lax monitoring of explosive storage. "These failures are documented in the OSHA standards," he said, "and they are exactly what the CDC calls preventable causes." Source: OSHA Explosive Safety Standards. Source: CDC Mining Disaster Statistics and Prevention. A sudden crash reverberated from the hallway. Someone knocked over a stack of folders, scattering papers across the polished floor. The inspector seized the moment, scooping up a torn page that bore the official seal of the National Safety Board. "This is the hidden truth you tried to bury," he declared, holding the page up for the camera. The owners stared, their composure cracking. In a final, desperate move, the chief of security lunged toward the recorder, his hand outstretched. The inspector's reflexes kicked in. He twisted the device, sending the recorder sliding across the floor and crashing into a metal cabinet. The impact sparked a faint flame, the orange glow illuminating the room's tension. The chief froze, eyes wide, as the recorder's red light flickered, still capturing every word. Source: BLS, fatal occupational injuries in mining. The inspector seized the moment, stepping back toward the doorway. "You can try to silence me," he said, voice echoing off the marble walls, "but the record will survive." He lifted the recorder, its battery still humming, and walked out, the heavy doors groaning behind him. The owners were left in a silent hall, their faces a mosaic of fear, guilt, and the dawning realization that the investigation had already pierced the veil they had tried to keep intact. Outside, the inspector paused, breathing the thin mountain air, the recorder still running. He knew the confrontation was only the beginning. The hidden truths he carried would soon ignite a public outcry, and the danger he felt behind those doors would follow him into the next chapter. The story, he understood, had only just begun to unfold. So the inspector's findings came to light, and let me tell you, the aftermath of the investigation sent shockwaves throughout the industry. It's pretty stark when you think about it. The reality of the mine disaster and its devastating consequences led to a major re-examination of safety protocols, and it was about time, if you ask me. According to a SEC Edgar report, safety measures and compliance were deemed inadequate, which just goes to show that we need stricter regulations, to keep people safe. Source: In response to all this, changes in safety regulations were implemented to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. I mean, it's just common sense. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, explosive safety standards, outlined in 29 CFR 1910-109, emphasize the importance of proper handling and storage of explosives to minimize risks. Because, let's be real, we don't want any more accidents. Source: A peer-reviewed article by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. notes that mining disaster statistics and prevention strategies are crucial in reducing the risk of such incidents, which is something we should all be aware of, if you ask me, source. The inspector's message to the public was clear. Safety is not guaranteed, and it's everyone's responsibility to demand better, we all have a role to play in this. A news article by China Daily reported on the mine collapse disaster in China, highlighting the need for improved safety measures, and it's just heartbreaking to think about all the lives lost, source. Furthermore, a government report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, on fatal occupational injuries in mining underscores the importance of prioritizing worker safety. Because, at the end of the day, it's all about keeping people safe, source. It's imperative that we learn from this tragedy and take immediate action to prevent similar disasters. I mean, we can't just sit back and do nothing. By supporting stricter safety regulations and holding industries accountable, we can work towards a future where safety is not just a guarantee, but a fundamental right, something we all deserve. The time for change is now, and it starts with acknowledging the severity of the situation and demanding better. So let's get to it, shall we?